Chapter 1. The silence before the storm. It didn't begin with an explosion. No tanks rolled across borders. No jets screamed overhead. There was no breaking news headline, no official press release. What unfolded between Russia and Burkina Faso happened quietly, in shadows beneath the noise of global headlines. But make no mistake, its impact is already reshaping continents. For years, the world's eyes were locked on the war in Ukraine. The West poured weapons into Eastern Europe. Leaders in Washington and Brussels spoke of unity, deterrence, and the rules-based order. But while the great powers shouted across snowy battlefields, something else was rising under the Saharan sun. A new voice, a new force, and a new alliance. That voice belonged to Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old military officer who seized power in Burkina Faso during a wave of anti-colonial sentiment sweeping through West Africa. Young, intense, and unrelenting, Traoré was more than just a transitional leader. To many across the continent, he was becoming a symbol of defiance, of dignity, of Africa rising, and in Moscow, Vladimir Putin was listening. For months, no one noticed the subtle signals, a shift in tone from the Kremlin, muted diplomatic movements, sudden disappearances of Western advisors in the Sahel, but behind the scenes, a series of meetings and covert communications laid the foundation for what would soon shock the Western world. It started with a flight in early June. Under the cover of night, a Russian aircraft, unmarked but unmistakably military, landed in Ouagadougou. Its passengers, a high-level intelligence team, fluent in strategy and silence. The mission: build a relationship that could change the balance of power between Russia, Africa, and the West. This was not just diplomacy, it was something far more calculated, far more explosive, and far more dangerous. Chapter 2. Who is Traoré? And why Putin listened. In the West, Traoré is often painted as just another military man, a soldier who stumbled into power in the chaos of coups. But that portrait is a poor imitation of the real figure, a leader shaped by history, ideology, and something far more personal, betrayal. Burkina Faso, once known as Upper Volta, has long been a target of colonial manipulation, first by France, later by foreign corporations. Its gold, cotton, and strategic location have made it a playground for outside powers. And when Traoré looked around his country, he didn't just see poverty or instability. He saw foreign hands pulling the strings. Educated, disciplined, and deeply ideological, Traoré didn't rise to power to become a puppet. He rose to cut the strings. That's what caught Putin's attention for years. The Russian president has positioned himself as the counterweight to Western dominance. While NATO expanded eastward, Putin built ties southward. Syria, Venezuela, Iran, all nations pushed to the fringes of the Western order. And now, Traoré was offering him something even bigger, a foothold in Africa's heart, a man who knew the West, who rejected it, and who was willing to fight. Their first contact wasn't loud. No press, no photos, no grand gestures. Just encrypted messages, indirect envoys, and a shared understanding. Both had been underestimated, both had been challenged, and both had something to prove. The connection was ideological, strategic, and deeply personal. Chapter 3. The quiet landing in Ouagadougou. Traoré knew the risks. He knew that welcoming Russian support would invite sanctions, isolation, and propaganda. But he also knew something else. His people were ready. Ready to reclaim sovereignty, ready to break the old patterns, ready to fight if necessary, for independence that wasn't just symbolic. So he gave the green light. In a highly coordinated operation. Russian military advisors, cybersecurity experts, and intelligence officers began arriving in Burkina Faso. Some posed as agricultural specialists, others as energy consultants. But their real task was simple: build capacity, fast. Training camps popped up near the capital. Satellite communication systems were quietly installed. Weapons shipments, labeled as technical supplies, moved through discrete supply chains. The Western embassies noticed. They filed reports, raised concerns, but they couldn't act. Not without evidence. And by the time the evidence reached Brussels or Paris, the groundwork had already been laid. The West was watching. But Putin and Traoré were already moving. Chapter 4, the speech. That set the region on fire. Then came the moment that would ignite everything. In a nationally televised address, standing in full military uniform before a sea of flags, Ibrahim Traoré spoke not just to his nation, but to the entire African continent. He didn't name the West. He didn't have to. He spoke of exploitation, of stolen futures, of broken promises made in foreign capitals. He called out decades of manipulation, rigged trade deals, and cultural erasure. And then, with chilling precision, he said the words that changed everything: "We will not kneel. Not to France, not to NATO, not to any empire." The crowd erupted. On social media, the clip spread like wildfire. From Bamako to Dakar, the message resonated. For millions, it was the first time a head of state had said aloud what they had felt for decades. And for the West, it was a warning within hours. French media labeled him a Russian proxy. Yes, officials called it dangerous rhetoric. But to Putin, it was a declaration of loyalty. And Moscow responded accordingly. Chapter 5, Russia's New Front. Africa. What followed next was unlike anything the Sahel region had seen before. Joint military exercises began, masked as regional security operations. Russian engineers helped build surveillance outposts, training centers, and encrypted comm lines across key territories. Burkina Faso's intelligence service, once dependent on French tech, now began receiving hardware directly from Moscow. But it wasn't just military. Russian media outlets began broadcasting in French and local languages across Burkina Faso and neighboring states. Documentaries highlighting Soviet-African solidarity aired nightly. Young Africans saw Putin not as a distant figure, but as a new kind of ally. One that didn't lecture. One that didn't colonize. Western NGOs began to withdraw. Investment contracts were canceled. Western diplomats were expelled, quietly, one by one, and then, in a move that stunned even seasoned analysts, Burkina Faso joined a new military and economic alliance, backed by Russia, including Mali and Niger. The message was clear. The Sahel was no longer France's backyard. It was now the front line of a new global power. Struggle. Chapter 6, Western Panic. Begins. Paris responded first, recalling diplomats, freezing aid packages, and threatening sanctions. NATO issued a formal warning, calling the alliance destabilizing. The European Union suspended development programs. And in Washington, the State Department scrambled to form a response. But the reality was simple: the West had been caught flat-footed. For decades, France had relied on cultural control, economic dependency, and soft power in West Africa. But Traoré had broken that cycle. And Putin had offered something France couldn't: respect, weapons, and a shared enemy. The Pentagon warned of Russian mercenaries expanding in the region. French media pushed stories about corruption and human rights abuses. But it didn't stick, because for the first time in generations, African people weren't listening to Europe. They were listening to each other. Chapter 7, The People Rise. And the world watches across the region. Spontaneous demonstrations erupted. In Mali, thousands marched with Russian flags and portraits of Traoré. In Niger, chants of "Down with the West" echoed in the streets. Social media was flooded with Pan-African hashtags, viral speeches, and revolutionary slogans. What started as diplomacy had become a people's movement. In marketplaces, in schools, even in rural villages, people debated what was happening. For some, it was hope. For others, it was fear. But no one, absolutely no one, was indifferent. Putin, long portrayed in the West as a villain, was now viewed in Africa as a liberator. Not because of what he said, but because of who stood with him. And at the center of it all stood Traoré, calm, defiant, and unshakable. Chapter 8, The Economic Power Shift. But alliances without resources are fragile. That's why the economic dimension came next. In a landmark deal signed under full media blackout, Russia and Burkina Faso agreed to resource sharing on a level never seen before. Gold mines, uranium fields, and oil reserves were placed under joint management. Russian companies, backed by the state, gained access, and in return, Burkina Faso received infrastructure, energy support, and military tech. Western corporations, who had long exploited these same resources, were pushed out. France lost billions. The EU panicked. The IMF threatened loan freezes. But the damage had already been done. A new model had been born, one based not on charity, but on power. And as this model spread to Mali, Niger, and beyond, a quiet panic spread through Western capitals, because this wasn't just about Russia anymore. This was about the end of Western economic control in Africa. Chapter 9. What this means for the future of the world is entering uncharted territory. In just 1 year, the alliance between Putin and Traoré has transformed from a whisper to a roar. It has inspired millions, unsettled empires, and ignited debates from Paris to Pretoria. And it's just beginning, if this movement holds. If more African nations align with Moscow, the entire post-World War II global order could unravel. NATO's southern flank would weaken. Western influence in Africa would collapse. And Russia would gain not just territory or trade, but a new global image, the image of a nation that subversivity, that fights colonialism, that stands beside those the West forgot. This is not a defense of either man, but it is a recognition of the moment we are living through, because history is moving fast, borders are shifting, alliances are crumbling. And as the dust settles, one truth remains. The West wasn't ready, but Putin and Traoré, they planned it all along. Asterisk.